March the 16th, 1968 saw at least 504 innocent Vietnamese civilians slaughtered by American troops in what was later known to the world as the Mỹ Lai massacre. Of the dead victims, 210 were children under 13. Many other lives were saved from the massacre thanks to the bravery by U.S. military helicopter pilot Hugh Thompson and his crew members Larry Cobbin and Glenn Andreotta. When Thompson found U.S. soldiers killing civilians in the village, he put his helicopter down between the soldiers and the villagers and ordered his men to shoot their fellow Americans if they attacked the civilians. The Whistleblower Mỹ Lai captures the artistic journey of the Kronos Quartet as they create an opera about the Mỹ Lai massacre. One of the darkest moments of the Vietnam War, which shook Americans' conscience. The story portrays Thompson in his final days, dying of cancer and keeping haunted by the massacre that happened 40 years earlier.
Emotional and haunting. Those are the feelings of the audiences when watching the documentary film The Whistleblower of Mỹ Lai. The film is a poignant echo of those who grew up through the 1960s, those who grew up knowing about the Vietnam War and what happened in Mỹ Lai, the Mỹ Lai massacre of 1968. Among those people are Academy Award-nominated filmmaker Connie Field, who is the director of The Whistleblower of Mỹ Lai. This past March 2018 saw Connie come to Vietnam for the very first time and set foot in Mỹ Lai. We're very lucky to have Connie in our studio today to talk more about her experience and share more about the people and the stories she's done. Hello, Connie.
Hi, pleased to see you.
Thank you very much for joining us here on Talk Vietnam. Let's go back now to the reason that led you to make the film The Whistleblower of Mỹ Lai. You'd never been to Vietnam or Mỹ Lai. What led you to, make this film about a place you'd never been to?
Well, I was an activist in the United States from the late 60s, mid-60s till the early 70s against the American war in Vietnam. So, and I worked full-time on that with many organizations. So it was a very big part of my personal life. So one evening I was having dinner with a colleague of my husband's, who's Jonathan Berger, who said he was creating this opera with the Kronos Quartet, who are very famous all over the world, about the Mỹ Lai massacre and the story of Hugh Thompson.
Yes.
And so I was immediately interested. I, like all of the Kronos, had never heard of Hugh Thompson. Okay, even though I was really active in the anti-war movement, very few people knew about him.
Yes. Tell us about that moment when you heard about the story of Hugh Thompson. What about his story intrigued you to the point that you wanted to, make this movie?
Well, part of it wasn't just about him. It was, I'd gotten interested. I've done a lot of social issue documentaries, a lot of social histories. And in the very last period of time, I've sort of had the experience of making a film that contained a work of art, okay, within a political context.
Yes.
I did that with a film I made in Palestine. So when I spoke to Jonathan, it just fit.
Yes.
Okay, because
it was also a musical piece.
Exactly, and it allowed me to expand on making those kinds of films. The film is just finished. We finished it days before I left. So I wanted to have the film first appear in Vietnam. So that's why I brought it here.
I didn't know anything about Mỹ Lai until this project. Just horrendous to hear that a whole village and the surroundings were completely destroyed. Just can't fathom it.
American soldiers were essentially going through this village, raping, bayoneting, murdering civilians. At least 500 people of all ages were massacred that day.
When I read about Hugh Thompson, I was completely floored.
This really isn't about the war. This is about a remarkable man. This is about an exception. Hugh Thompson is an exception.
I always wanted to fly.
Hugh Thompson was a 22 or 23-year-old reconnaissance pilot. He flew a small helicopter with a crew of 3 people. Happened to fly over Songmi and looked down and saw something wrong happening in Mỹ Lai. He radioed to check what was going on, got evasive answers, and at that moment made his first decision. He just could not fly over and shrug his shoulders. So he made his first of 3 landings.
Tell us a little bit about the name of the film.
In a way, Hugh Thompson was a whistleblower. He was kind of like an internal whistleblower. There's internal and there's external. And because of the fact that he reported it to the military and later on testified of it, made it, created a situation where you could not ignore it because there was proof there. Because once you report it, it's written down and it's, written in stone. They didn't erase it. So it was extremely important what he did. What was also phenomenal about him, because I really learned about him as I was making the film, was how someone that young in that situation could be that brave.
Yes.
I mean, to be in the military, to almost fire on your own troops, and to report it. And he was only in his early 20s. These were very young
Yes.
guys.
I think it shows,
it was phenomenal. And then what happened to him afterwards was horrendous. He was ostracized.
Yes.
Even though he stayed in the military all his life, he loved being in the military. But it wasn't an easy road. And it was only 30 years later that his bravery was acknowledged and he was given a Medal of Honor by the military.
Yes.
But this was also due to a public campaign. People in the United States wrote letters. There was a whole campaign to write letters to the military to honor Hugh Thompson and Larry Coburn. And it worked.
Yes.
And Jonathan Berger, the composer, was part of that campaign.
Exactly. Tell us more about, your thoughts about the action of what Hugh and Larry and Glenn did among, they were, going against their own military at that point in order to save these helpless people.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think what I hope everybody else will feel when they see the film, it took a very special kind of bravery to do something like that. And it also takes a certain morality, a personal morality, because you're reacting in the instant. Yes. This is not something you think about or whatever. You just do it. So it meant that he was to me, a deeply caring person and a deeply moral person. And I think very much about the whole story, what Jonathan thought, that that it encapsulates what is best in us as human beings and what is worst in us.
That's true.
All there in one story.
Yes.
In Hanoi, Connie Field had two showings for the film she directed, The Whistleblower of Mỹ Lai. The first showing saw an audience that were predominantly made up of internationals and expats.
It's a message for everyone not to keep silence, not to keep silence. You see something, don't hold it. Go out with it, don't keep silence. And I think this is the most important message.
Many of us have heard about those horrible events, but it's different to read about it in the newspaper or just to have an account of the facts or to approach it like from this kind of view, which is more in depth.
Phạm Quốc Đạt is among the few young Vietnamese audience members present at this screening.
Có lẽ là cái mà Đạt cảm thấy động lại lớn nhất đấy là cái giá trị của nghệ thuật trong việc kể lại những cái câu chuyện lịch sử. Đôi khi chúng ta phải tìm cách tiếp cận nó một cách dễ hiểu hơn, một cách dễ dàng tiếp cận hơn với những người trẻ.
The second film screening was organized by the Vietnam-US Society. The film left a deep impression on people's artist Đặng Nhật Minh, a veteran director of Vietnam cinematography.
Mình đã xem rất nhiều phim làm về chiến tranh Việt Nam. Nhiều cái phim này nó có một cái cách tiếp cận đặc biệt. Về nói nội dung thì tôi thấy là nó cho tôi được một cái triết lý thế này. Ở trong những cái bức tranh tăm tối nhất, đen tối nhất, ở cái nơi tội ác hoành hành nhất, chúng ta cũng đừng tuyệt vọng. Vì ở đó vẫn có lóe lên những cái đốm sáng, lóe lên những cái tia sáng của lương tri của con người. Và cụ thể trong này là anh Thompson.
It is the moral message of the film that was the defining reason for which Tôn Nữ Thị Ninh, one of Vietnam's long-standing and reputable diplomats, decided to help with the film's premiere in Vietnam.
Đối với người Việt, tôi nghĩ là cái thông điệp đó rất là quan trọng. Nó làm cho chúng ta hiểu là ngay cả trong lòng quân đội Mỹ cũng có những người có lương tâm, những người dũng cảm, những người có bản lĩnh. Tôi thấy là những khán giả xung quanh ai cũng phải nói là chăm chú và tôi cảm nhận là họ hiểu được cái thông điệp về cái tính nhân văn có thể có trong mỗi con người.
For an American veteran who has once served in Vietnam, such as Chuck Silsey, the film leaves him in contemplation.
For me, as a veteran, as an American citizen, in America we use the term hero very loosely, and we misuse that term. Sometimes we abuse that term, hero. But this is one of those few cases during the war in Vietnam when there actually were heroes who tried their best to intervene and stop something terrible that was happening.
Director Connie Field chose Vietnam as the debut location for her film. She looks to screening the film in the US during autumn 2018.
Speaking with Vietnamese audiences during some of these screenings, what did you talk about and what did you share with the audience?
Well, I shared with the audience who I was and why I made this film, and that I'd been an anti-war activist for 7 years. And that was an incredibly big part of shaping who I am as a person and shaping what I value and shaping how I see the world, sort of to explain that to them.
Tell us about the process of making this film, about kind of, incorporating music and the story. How difficult was it for you as the director?
This wasn't a very difficult film at all. I mean, it was done in my backyard. I live in the San Francisco Bay Area. That's where the Kronos are based. So, and so I just filmed their process. I was at every single rehearsal and at 2 of their first performances. So it was fairly easy. I do my own shooting. And my editor, Greg, does the sound. So we're like a little team. So this one was relatively easy. I think that, but when we found the strength of the story is really once we bring the opera in.
That's true.
Okay.
It was more kind of the actual opera and the music that went on. This opera featured a Vietnamese artist, Vanessa Volvenang. What do you think about the significance of having such a Vietnamese artist in the film and in the opera production? I think it was crucial to have her in, just as David Harrington did. David Harrington, the Kronos had worked with Van An. So at the Kronos, one of the things that is very particular and wonderful about their work is they incorporate musicians from all over the world into how they perform their music. Yes.
So it's, in a certain way, they're like musical cultural ambassadors to the world.
That's true.
And so, and David was adamant that she had to be part of the group. I wouldn't say difficult, but it was quite a challenge with Jonathan because he had composed for quartets.
Yes.
That was easy. It was all in his head. But these other instruments and what they do and what they mean in terms of his creating his music was an entirely new thing.
Yeah.
Do you have the? I went to visit Van An and spent an afternoon with her.
Yes.
Sure. And I was just literally blown away by her intense musicality.
So far, I have been able to work with Jonathan in that way. I tell them what is advantage, disadvantage of the instrument, and then they go ahead and write whatever they have in mind. And then I work on that, and then I see how it fits with my instrument. If it doesn't, I propose would be the solution. You know, the structure of the bamboo xylophone, the terung, is so special that some notes I have 2 sides to play, but some notes I just have 1. For example, like C, I only have 1 C and 1 C sharp.
Right.
And 1 F and 1 F sharp. So when I have bum, bum, then I have to jump into here, B, right? But then F will be on the same side. I cannot cross.
I see, right.
So that will slow down the whole speed.
Right, so as long as you're not crossing over, then you could do it at speed.
Yeah.
They are not only incredibly beautiful and wonderful traditional instruments, but one of the major weapons that were used by the Viet Cong were spiked bamboo, exactly like these. The other instrument that's of note is a gong. And it turns out that the gongs in Vietnam are all fashioned from American mortar shells.
At a village near Hanoi, they actually collect artillery shells from everywhere. And then I came, you can see like the whole house with artillery shells. And I had to choose the one that have the best sound still.
So that'll be fine for me.
I smuggled it from Vietnam to here. My parents took in 2 of this, and me took in 2 of this. And we were very worried because it looked like it's the artillery shell. But I had to make sure that we clean well, so that's no, explosive, for anything that happened like that.
So in a way, I'm creating this piece in which weapons are playing the music.
For you, when you first saw the opera, what did you think about the music and how it kind of helped to tell the story?
It really provides an emotional base that you can't really get any other way.
Yes.
Okay? Especially when the people themselves are no longer living, and it's about something that happened a long time ago. It makes it immediate.
That's true.
So, I valued that a lot.
Yes. So this is your very first trip to Vietnam and the first time you've set foot in My Lai. How's that experience?
Okay, I'll be honest about one thing. It's that what I found with myself, okay, in terms of going to My Lai or making the film about it, revisiting those images about it, which I would like to talk about, is the images, is the fact that our country is still doing the same things. You see, it hasn't stopped. There are horrendous things that went on in Afghanistan, in Iraq, and it gets worse and worse and worse. So, and how the United States intervention damages the countries they're intervening in is much worse than what happened here in Vietnam.
Yes.
So that has become now my experience of my country and the damage it can do. So this no longer is an incident that I can be singularly appalled by. Do you see what I mean? I mean, emotionally, because the country, the United States, has done so much worse since then.
Yes.
So that's filtered through for me.
Yes.
And it was, I think it was very meaningful for me to see the way things were displayed, okay, to see the ditches that were there and think back, of making the film and what the ditches meant. And I think the most meaningful for me is going to the museum there. Seeing Hugh there and Larry there and Glenn there, right prominent at the opening, I didn't know that was going to happen. And that to me was really meaningful. That, somewhere in the world, they're held in high esteem for what they did.
When I saw the bodies in the ditch and saw that some of them were still alive, I sat down on the ground then and talked to, pretty sure it was a sergeant, and I asked him, I told him that there was women and kids over there that were wounded, could he help them? And he made something to the remark, the only way he could help them was to kill them.
The long ditch, the long ditch. Every morning, every day,
And then as they pulled away, I imagine him shaking with rage and helplessness and confusion, fury. And as they hovered, they saw a wounded girl on the ground and an officer coming up to her.
The captain walks up, pokes her with his boot. His boot! He raises his automatic and God in heaven, what did you do? Creating such a son of a bitch!
It's incumbent upon the leaders, like Captain Medina, who was never prosecuted, of course, to actually step up and say, guys, stand down. It's their job to understand the psychology that's driving their troops and to understand how dangerous that is. Those are the guys that should have been prosecuted. Medina should have been thrown in jail.
Well, have you done anything wrong?
No, sir, I haven't.
You sure of that?
Yes, sir.
And so the whole thing hinged on that moment when he sees Captain Medina walk up and blow this civilian away like it was just what you do.
I was with you. You know, I was very lucky to follow you in this journey of you. The first time you going into this museum at the Mỹ Lai, the site honoring the Mỹ Lai massacre, the Sơn Mỹ massacre, you met many people that, you know, are survivors, that are people now in their 50s or 60s who were under 10 years of age back then. How was that experience?
It was extremely meaningful to meet a man who was a boy during that time and who was the son of a woman in a photo that we use in our film. What it meant to me, because when I made use of that photo of his mother in my film, my understanding of what happened to her was totally different than what he told me what happened to her. She had already been shot in 2 places. So that means she was lying on the ground, completely wounded, and that meant a U.S. soldier came and point blank shot her in the head. I mean, he could see what he was shooting. I mean, it's horrible. And I think one of the most impressive thing to me was the various people I met and their connection to this massacre and their urgency with communicating with me about it.
Yes.
Okay, and even when things weren't being translated and I had no idea what they were saying, I could see in their eyes and their face and their expression that there was something they really, really wanted me to understand.
Trần Văn Đức lost his mother, an older sister and a younger sister in the Mỹ Lai massacre on March the 16th, 1968. Đức witnessed the horrendous events of the massacre at the mere age of 7 years old.
Chính mắt chú Đức thấy tất cả những người này ngã xuống khi trúng đạn và tiếng la tiếng ré vô cùng thảm thương trong thời khắc đó.
Đức and Hà, another of his sister who was only 14 months old then, luckily escaped death. It was their mother who protected them and pointed them towards escape.
Má của chú Đức trong cái thời khắc mà súng nổ thì đẩy chú xuống dưới một cái khoảng ruộng này và ôm Hà ngã xuống cùng. Chú Đức còn nhìn thấy những lính Mỹ họ tới rất sát họ để họ bắn những đứa nhỏ mà còn sống. Sau đó thì chú Đức mới đi men theo hướng này. Chú Đức lên giữa đường, chú Đức nhìn lại má. Lúc đó là cái giây phút khoảnh khắc đó đối với Đức là coi như là quá lớn. Rất là khó khăn để rồi má mình lúc đó bị thương rất nặng.
Đức mother would then be slaughtered under the hands of American soldiers.
Giờ đây là mẹ của chú Đức.
Đức is not the only surviving victim of the massacre present at the Museum of the Sơn Mỹ Memorial Site. They are here on the occasion marking 50 years since 504 civilians of Sơn Mỹ or Mỹ Lai were murdered in the massacre that shocked the world. The painful memories of what had happened are vivid in the minds of those living.
Như tôi hồi đó mà tôi mới có 8 tuổi, nghe lên người ta bác đùng quần áo chưa có cái nào cũng chạy theo người ta về tôi chứ đâu biết.
Không có thể mừng tượng được. Rồi chấn động vậy. Người trâu thúi. Còn dưới mưa á, máu chảy.
Bắn quét súng rồi có một ngã xuống sông luôn đâu 3 người. 3 cô rác hết xuống sông luôn, còn nhiều trâu. Bây giờ thì còn mình rồi thì coi như là cứ mình nghĩ người cũng như mình đâu ai cũng phải có cái tâm nào đó như cầu mong là hòa bình thôi.
The person who wrote kind of the words to the opera that inspired your film, The Whistleblower of Mỹ Lai, Harriet Scott Chessman, she once said that she couldn't say that this country, meaning the United States, had learned much from what happened here in Mỹ Lai. What do you think of that?
I think it's really learned nothing from it. As I kind of made clear, we've only gotten worse and we've only done more damage since that time. And it's, you know, and people in the U.S. are really not taught correct history. And even in the big series that was just done about Vietnam, that Ken Burns did, there's a lot of things that are not right historically in the series. And though there's a lot of things of value in it, I won't completely discount it. But, you know, but she's right. I mean, if you learn something, you don't do it again.
Going back now to your meetings, your encounters with the different victims in your trip in Mỹ Lai, if you had one thing to say to the victims in Mỹ Lai, what would you say?
That I think I'd say that many Americans care about this. They care about the wounds that have been inflicted on the Vietnamese people for that war. And that many Americans were against that war. And the tragedy that they suffered taught a huge amount of Americans about what their government was capable of.
Yes. It's probably something a lot of Vietnamese people do not know.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think of how kind of the Vietnamese people have greeted you in your trip here to Vietnam, being an American?
Our experience has been great. I mean, I love Vietnam. I didn't expect that. And I'll be honest, I've been to a lot of Asian countries, and they often feel very alien to me. But this doesn't. I mean, I really love it. I think that all the Vietnamese people I've met have been absolutely wonderful. And it's an extraordinary place. And it's so beautiful. I mean, I took a trip up north and visited a lot of the different communities that are up there.
Yes, the ethnic groups.
The ethnic groups that are up there. The countryside is astounding. And I love it. So it's for me, the first Asian country I've really loved.
When you were in Mỹ Lai, obviously you saw, how this land around Mỹ Lai had developed beyond what had happened there 50 years ago, and the people as well. What do you think about kind of the strength of some of the people in the Mỹ Lai area in overcoming their past and kind of moving on?
Well, that's true for all of Vietnam. It's not just in Mỹ Lai. I mean, what a friend told me, who's Vietnamese, that the Vietnamese look forward. They don't look back, they look forward. And I think maybe with that kind of mentality, that as a culture, you found it not useful to hold grudges for whatever you've been through. You try to greet each day as a new day and a new day of possibilities. And I think it's that character that makes people so open. Because in many cultures, you really hold on to your past forever. I mean, I'm a Jewish origin. I mean, I'm not a religious Jew, but I'm a cultural Jew. And we're certainly taught you can never escape that fact. And we are certainly taught to hold on to our history. Yes. Really, really, really strongly. And that's true in many, many places. So I think your culture is very different. And
I think in a sense, people there, in a sense, they don't forget, but they have this willingness to forgive and to move on, to embrace the future in a sense. Going back now to the beginning, you're going back to your life in the United States. How did you develop a love for filmmaking?
One of the groups I worked with in the 60s and early 70s was a group called Newsreel. And we were in about 8 cities all over the country, and we made films about what was happening, and we showed Felix screens, inside North Vietnam, and took it all around the country, and we had tremendous distribution. I mean, it was used everywhere. So that was my first exposure to film. And then I was looking for a way, and I got interested in doing a lot of what I call untold histories, yes, because it was so valuable to me as a very young person to learn about how things happened that was never taught to me.
Yes.
So that's why I've been interested in doing that, unearthing stories that haven't been told historically. When I did the film about women during World War II, it was the first thing that got done about that, and books came later. It's the same is true about the global anti-apartheid movement.
Yes.
There's still been no book that is in-depth global about that
yeah. issue.
Connie Field is an Academy Award-nominated director who has made a number of high-profile documentaries that have been shown all over the world. Many of her films focus on what she calls untold histories.
Of bondage.
Prominent among that was a 7-part series, Have You Heard from Johannesburg, on the global movement that ended apartheid in South Africa, which aired on PBS and the BBC in 2012. Some of her previous work includes Freedom on My Mind, a history of the civil rights movement in Mississippi, and the feminist classic The Life and Times of Rosie the Riveter. She has won numerous awards, including 2-time Academy Award nominations, the Sundance Grand Jury Prize, and a Primetime Emmy Award. Her work has been broadcast in over 30 countries.
Up until now, what would you say has made you the most proud of your career in filmmaking?
Well, obviously, it's of tremendous value to a filmmaker that your work gets acknowledged. So being nominated for Academy Awards, being in the Academy and winning Emmy, and those things are one set of values to me. But I think the thing that's been most valuable is what happened with my very first film. Because I was telling an historical story. It really moved people all over. In fact, there was a festival in London recently that was of stories, people wrote in and said, what were the films that really changed your life? And mostly they were features, but it was rosy. And people said, this made me a feminist.
Yes.
You know, way back then. It had a tremendous impact on a lot of people, and it's lived forever, which is really highly unusual. I mean, it's actively lived. It's not something that when people are doing film history, they pick out this film and this part of this. It's actively, you know, taught all over, and so I think that's been of really great value to me.
Yes. Can you share with us some of your future plans? Obviously, you have not shown the film, The Whistleblower of Mỹ Lai, in the United States. Perhaps that's the next plan?
Yes, we will try to get the film out in the United States and globally, which we'll largely try to do through film festivals. So we'll see. It's very tough, and we'll also mount a campaign to get it into the schools, and we'll see if there's, you know, what TV does with it.
Well, thank you very much, Connie.
Thank you.
For coming on Talk Vietnam, sharing your story, your amazing experience of creating, you know, the films that you have, films that are untold stories. And we hope that, you know, stories like that of The Whistleblower of Mỹ Lai and other stories that you've done will continue to live on and bring universal values and tools that people can still find very beneficial and very useful in this day and age.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And that has wrapped up our Talk Vietnam with Connie Field, the director of the film The Whistleblower of Mỹ Lai. We wish her all of the best of luck in continuing to bring the film to the public to ensure that nothing so horrible will ever happen on Earth again, and that people may learn from the values that this film has historically that will continue to live on. Thank you very much for tuning in, and we'll see you more next time here on Talk Vietnam. Goodbye for now.